The dare traveled across the ballroom before the girl did, and the Duke of Calderstone, standing in the shadow of a marble pillar where he believed himself unobserved, heard every word of it. "I dare you," said the golden creature in the ice-blue silk, her fan snapping shut against her wrist like a small trap closing. "Go and dance with him. The one by the pillar, the great glowering thing no one will go near. Go and ask him yourself, since you are so very brave and so very good, Miss Selwyn. Ask him to dance, and we shall see whether even a scarecrow can charm a stone." The set around her tittered. A foppish young lord with too many fobs at his waist laughed until he had to press a handkerchief to his mouth. Everard did not move. He had spent the better part of the evening perfecting the art of not moving, of being a dark and unremarkable pillar of a man among the gilt and the feathers, and he had grown very good at it. He had come to the Ashcombe ball because Halloran had all but bullied him into it, because a man could not mourn for 3 years in a shuttered house without becoming a ghost in his own life, and because no one at this crowded provincial assembly had the least idea who he was. That was the whole of its appeal. To stand unknown. To be, for one evening, merely a tall man in a well-cut coat and not the Duke of Calderstone, whose name was spoken in the same breath as tragedy and dread. He watched the girl they had chosen for their sport. She was plainly dressed, and that was the first thing anyone would have noticed and the last thing worth noticing about her. Her gown was a gray that had once been something warmer and had been turned and mended into respectability. The hem, he saw, had been let down, and the old crease pressed over so often it had gone shiny. She wore no jewels. A poor relation, then, or a companion, one of those gray women who fetched shawls and read aloud and were spoken over as though they were furniture. He knew the breed. He had a household full of people the polished world overlooked, and he had learned long ago that the overlooked saw everything. She did not flush. That surprised him. He had expected her to redden and stammer and be pushed toward him like a lamb, and instead she stood very straight and looked at the golden girl with an expression he could not immediately name. It was not fear. It was something closer to pity, though there was steel underneath it. "You wish me to make a spectacle of a gentleman who has done nothing but stand quietly at a ball," the gray girl said. Her voice carried further than she perhaps intended, low and clear. "For your amusement, Miss Vaughn." "I wish you to do as you are told," said Cassia Vaughn sweetly, "which is, after all, your particular gift. Or are you too proud? A companion proud? Lady Marchbanks would be diverted to hear it." Everard saw the small flinch that name produced. So the Dowager Marchbanks was her mistress, that dragon in bombazine and diamonds he had been introduced to and instantly forgotten. The threat was plain enough even to a stranger. Refuse and be reported and be turned off and be nothing at all, a woman without character or place. The whole cruel machinery of it was laid bare in a single silken sentence, and the men around Cassia Vaughn found it charming. The girl came toward him. He had time to school his face into its usual granite before she reached him, time to prepare the flat cold stare that had frozen bolder people than she into retreat. He fully intended to use it. He had no wish to be a stone charmed for a wager, no wish to be the instrument of this pale girl's humiliation or his own. He would give her the same wintry nothing he gave everyone. She would go back defeated. The golden girl would win her cruel little game, and Everard would leave and never think of any of them again. That was the plan. It survived exactly until she stopped before him and he saw her eyes. They were gray like her gown, but not tired gray. They were the gray of light on water, and they were fixed on his face with a directness that had nothing of mockery in it and nothing of fear. She was frightened, he could tell, but not of him. She was frightened of what stood behind her, and she had chosen to walk toward the thing everyone else avoided rather than serve the thing everyone else admired. "Forgive me, sir," she said quietly. "I am about to do something unpardonably forward, and I find I would rather warn you of it than surprise you. I have been dared to come and ask you to dance. It was meant to embarrass us both. You have every right to send me away, and I shall not blame you for it in the least. But I could not bear to make you the object of a joke you had no part in. So I have told you the truth of it, and now you may do as you please." Everard stood very still. In 3 years no one had spoken to him honestly. They had flattered or feared him. They had wanted his patronage or his purse or the reflected consequence of his notice. And after the grief they had watched him sidelong, whispering, as one watches a house where something dreadful has occurred. No one had walked up to him and confessed a scheme against him and then set him free of it in the same breath, as if his dignity were a thing worth protecting even at the cost of her own. "And if I send you away," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant, unused to use, "you will be the loser by it. She will crow. You will be laughed at across the whole of this room." Something flickered over her face. She had not expected him to see so clearly. "Yes," she admitted, "but I would rather be laughed at for keeping faith with a stranger than applauded for wounding one. It is a poor sort of bargain, I know. My employer would tell me I have not the wit I was born with." "Your employer," he said, "is a fool." Her lips parted, and then, astonishingly, she laughed, a small startled sound quickly caught and smothered behind her composure, and it changed her whole face. For an instant the gray girl was not plain at all. Everard made a decision he could not afterward explain. He, who had refused invitations from 3 separate hostesses that very fortnight, who had not danced since before the Black Years, who wished for nothing on earth but to be left in the cold peace of his own company, put out his hand. "Then let us disappoint them both," he said. "You shall not be laughed at and I shall not be pitied, and we will give Miss Vaughn something to chew that she likes rather less than triumph. Will you dance, madam? Not because you were dared, because I am asking." He watched the shock of it move through her, and then the slow warmth that followed, and she laid her gloved hand in his. It was the first time in longer than he could remember that another human being had touched him without wanting something. Her hand trembled very slightly and then was steady. They went out onto the floor as the musicians struck up. He was aware, distantly, of the room changing around them. He had cultivated invisibility all evening, and he felt it fall from him now like a dropped cloak. Heads turned, fans lifted, the particular hush that means a thing is being remarked upon rolled out from where they moved. He did not care. He found, to his own quiet amazement, that he cared for nothing in that moment but the woman before him and the figures of the dance, which his body remembered though his heart had forgotten. "You dance well, sir, for a man of stone," she murmured, when the movement brought them close. "And you are impertinent," he said, "for a woman who a moment ago feared for her place." "I have already committed the sin," she answered. "I may as well enjoy the fall." Her eyes were bright. "If I am to be turned off tomorrow for dancing with the wrong man, I should like at least to have danced well." "You will not be turned off. You cannot know that." "No," he conceded, turning her under his arm, catching her again with a care that surprised him. "But I have observed that the world is very often kinder than it threatens to be, and very often crueler. One learns not to spend tonight's happiness paying tomorrow's debts." She was quiet a moment. "That is either great wisdom, sir, or great weariness." "It is both," said Everard. "They are frequently the same thing." She looked at him then with a sudden searching attention, as though she had heard under the dry words the wound they came from. He braced for the pity he loathed. It did not come. Instead she said gently, "Whatever grieved you, sir, I am sorry for it. There, I have said it, and now I shall not mention it again, for I dare say you are hunted with sorries and want none of mine." Everard could not speak for a moment. The dance turned them apart and brought them back. "What is your name?" he asked when he had command of himself. "Rowena Selwyn, companion to Lady Marchbanks, as you have been so thoroughly informed." A dry twist of her mouth. "And you, sir, since I have insulted you, danced with you, and pitied you all within a quarter of an hour, I feel I ought to know at least what to call the man I have so comprehensively imposed upon." Was the moment. He felt it arrive like a step missed in the dark. He had only to say the words to tell her that he was the Duke of Calderstone. They would fall between them and everything would change. She would go pale and drop her eyes and begin to my lord him, and the honest gray creature who had told him the truth and pitied him and called his employer a fool would vanish behind the wall, his rank raised in every face. He had watched it happen 1,000 times. He could not bear to watch it happen now. "Calder," he said, "you may call me Mr. Calder." It was not quite a lie. Calder was the old name of the family before the title, still carved over the abbey door, and half his tenants called the estate Calder's ground. It was near enough to the truth that it did not feel like deceit. It felt, absurdly, like a reprieve. "Mr. Calder," she repeated, and smiled, and the name in her mouth was the pleasantest sound he had heard in years. The dance was ending. He was aware of Cassia Vaughn watching from the edge of the floor, her lovely face gone tight and puzzled, the wager souring in her hands. She had meant to serve up a scarecrow's rebuff, and instead the stranger no one dared approach had danced a full set with her drab little victim and shown, by every line of his attentive body, that he was enjoying it. That, Everard thought with a grim satisfaction, would cost the girl her whole evening's pleasure, and it was no more than she deserved. He bowed over Rowena's hand as the music died. He held it, perhaps, a half-moment longer than the figure required. "Miss Selwyn," he said, "you did me a kindness tonight that you will not understand and that I cannot properly explain. I shall not forget it. If it is within my power to see that you suffer nothing for it, I will." "You speak as though you were a person of consequence, Mr. Calder," she said, teasing, not knowing how the words struck him. "I speak as a man who pays his debts," he said. "Good night, Miss Selwyn." He walked from the room without hurry, feeling the eyes on his back, and he did not look for Halloran, who would be somewhere near the cardroom worrying, and he did not stop for the hostess. He wanted the cold air. He wanted the dark. He wanted most of all to be alone with the extraordinary and unwelcome fact that for the length of a single dance he had felt entirely, painfully alive, and that the feeling had come to him from the hand of a poor gray woman who did not know his name. Outside, the night was clear and hard with stars. His carriage came round, black and crested, and he checked the coachman with a lifted hand and stood a moment on the steps, breathing. He had come to this country to be no one. He had meant to sell the lesser estate, settle the tenants, and go abroad again, further this time, somewhere the name of Calderstone meant nothing, and the memory of the wife and the child he had lost could not find him in every shuttered room. That had been the plan of a man who wanted only to stop feeling. And now here he stood on a stranger's steps with the ghost of a woman's laugh in his ears, and for the first time in 3 years he did not want the night to end. Halloran found him there. The steward was a broad, graying man of near 60, plainly dressed, with the shrewd, steady eyes of one who had served the family since Everard was a boy in leading strings, and had earned, through the black years, the right to speak to his master as no one else dared. "You danced," Halloran said, in the tone of a man reporting a comet. "I danced with the Marchbank's companion, the little gray one they set on to you as a jest." Halloran's brows drew together. "The whole room is talking of it, and no one knows your name, and that Vaughan chit looks fit to spit. Everard." The Christian name, used rarely, meant the old man was in earnest. "What are you about?" Everard looked out at the dark shape of the land beyond the drive, the hills that folded down toward his own unlit house some miles off. "I gave her a name that was not mine," he said slowly, "and I find I do not regret it. Do not lecture me tonight, Halloran. Tomorrow you may tell me every way in which I am a fool. Tonight I should like to be one in peace." Halloran was silent a long moment. Then, gruffly, "She kept faith with you. I heard tell of that too, that she warned you of the dare rather than spring it. That's a rare thing in a fine room, my lord. Rare enough that a wise man might want to know more of the woman who did it." Everard said nothing, but as the carriage bore him home through the black country, past his own gates and up the long avenue to the great house where every window had stayed dark for 3 years, he found he was already turning over, in the practiced strategist's part of his mind, the question of how a man named Mr. Calder might, quite by accident, contrive to meet Miss Rowena Selwyn again. The library at Netherstowe was open to any respectable subscriber for the price of a small yearly fee, and Everard had never in his life set foot in it until the Thursday after the ball, when he discovered, through the simple expedient of asking Halloran to make inquiries, that Lady Marchbanks sent her companion there every Thursday morning to change the dowager's novels. He told himself he had business in the town. He had none. He told himself that a man might read, and that his own great shelves at Calderstone had been shut behind their brown holland covers for 3 years, and he could hardly be blamed for wanting a book. He told himself a great many reasonable things, and beneath all of them ran the plain, unreasonable truth, which was that he wished to see her again and had contrived it as deliberately as any green boy. She was there, as he had known she would be, standing at the shelves in the same turned gray gown with a stack of dog-eared volumes balanced against her hip, frowning over a title. She did not see him at first. Everard permitted himself the rare luxury of watching her unobserved, and he saw that when she thought herself alone her face relaxed out of its careful companion's composure into something quicker and hungrier. She read the spines with the frank greed of a woman who loved books and was permitted few, and when she found one she wanted, she pressed it to her a moment before she remembered it was not for her, and set it back. "That one is worth the stealing," he said. She turned, and the color came up in her face, and he watched her recognize him with a plain, unguarded gladness she did not think to hide. "Mr. Calder." Then, recovering, arch, "I was not stealing it. I was resisting the temptation to, which is a very different and much more virtuous occupation." "I stand corrected." He came to stand beside her, taller than the shelves, and looked at the book she had put back. It was a volume of poems, unfashionable, 10 years old. Marchbanks does not care for verse. Lady Marchbanks cares for novels in which wicked barons are foiled and virtuous orphans come into fortunes, said Rowena, which I read aloud to her 4 evenings in 5, doing all the voices. She is particularly fond of the villains. I do a very fine villain. Her mouth curved. The poems are for me, or would be, if a companion had leisure or coin for such things, which she has neither. Everard reached past her and took the volume from the shelf. "Then permit a man who has both to lend you his. I subscribed this morning." He had subscribed 11 minutes ago for precisely this purpose and would not tell her so. "Take it. Bring it back next Thursday and tell me whether the fellow can write, and I will consider the fee well spent." She looked at the book and then at him, and something careful came into her eyes. "You are very kind, Mr. Calder, but I must be honest with you, for I find I cannot manage to be anything else in your company, which is inconvenient. A gentleman does not lend books to a lady's companion without the town making a story of it, and the story is never to the companion's credit. I have my character to keep. It is the only property I own." The plainness of it went into him like a blade. She was telling him, without complaint, that she lived on a knife's edge of respectability, that a kindness could ruin her as surely as an insult, that even so small a thing as a borrowed book of poems was a risk she could not lightly take. And she was telling him the truth again, when 100 other women would have simpered and accepted and schemed. "Then we shall be open about it," said Everard, "and rob the story of its teeth. I will lend the book to Lady Marchbanks for the improvement of her household, and you shall read it aloud to her of an evening, doing all the voices, and if it happens that you read a little of it to yourself besides, that is between you and the poet." He held it out. There, unimpeachable. Rowena laughed the startled laugh he had begun, dangerously, to want to provoke. "You have the makings of a very great schemer, Mr. Calder." "You have no idea," he said, "how right you are," and she took the book. "That was the first of them. There were others." He would not have called it courtship in those early weeks, because to call it that would have obliged him to face what he was doing, and Everard had built his survival on not facing things. But he arranged, with a cunning that would have done credit to a general, to be where she was. He found that Lady Marchbanks aired her small, ill-tempered spaniel in the Netherstowe pleasure gardens on fine mornings. The dog dragged along by the companion, while the dowager held court on a bench with her cronies. And so Everard walked in the pleasure gardens on fine mornings, and lifted his hat to Lady Marchbanks, who was flattered to distraction by the notice of so distinguished-looking a stranger, and never once thought to ask his full history. And then he walked a little apart with the companion and the spaniel, and they talked. They talked of everything. He had not known he had so much left in him to say. He had spent 3 years in silence and found, with Rowena Selwyn, that the silence had not been emptiness but only a held breath. She was quick, and she was kind, and she was without the smallest particle of the cultivated helplessness he despised in fashionable women. She had opinions and defended them, laughed at herself, argued with him about the poems, and was frequently right. She had been gently born, he learned in pieces, the daughter of a clergyman with more learning than living, orphaned young, passed from one grudging relation to another until she was old enough to be useful, and then set to the long gray trade of being useful to people who did not love her. She told him this without self-pity, as one recites the weather. "You are not bitter," he said once, watching her. "You have every right to be, and you are not. How?" She considered it, turning the spaniel's lead in her fingers. "Bitterness is expensive," she said at last. "It costs you the present in payment for the past, and the past is already lost, so you have paid twice for nothing. I decided when I was perhaps 16 and very unhappy that I would not do it, that whatever the world took from me I would keep my own good humor, because it was mine and no one could dismiss me from it." She glanced up at him, half shy. "That sounds a great deal grander than it is. Mostly it means I laugh at Lady Marchbanks's spaniel, who is a truly detestable animal, and feel better." Everard looked at her a long moment. He was thinking of his own 3 years of shuttered rooms and refused invitations, of the bitterness he had wrapped himself in like a black coat, of how he had let the past bill him twice and thrice and again. He was thinking that this gray, overlooked woman, who owned nothing but her character and her good humor, was richer than he had been since the day they buried his wife and the infant son who had lived only 9 days after her. "You put me to shame, Miss Selwyn," he said quietly. "I cannot imagine how," she said. "You are the most self-possessed man I ever met." "That," said Everard, "is not the same as being at peace, but you would not know the difference to look at me. Few do." She did not press him. That was another of her rare qualities. She let a man keep his silences. She only walked beside him, and the detestable spaniel snuffled in the gravel, and the morning light came down gold through the limes, and Everard was, without noticing the exact moment it had happened, happy. Halloran did notice, and Halloran was not happy at all. "You are riding to Netherstowe 4 days in the week," the steward said one evening, standing in the study at Calderstone where a single lamp now burned, one small light in the great dark house. "You have taken the covers off the library. Cook tells me you asked for the good silver polished. And the town is full of a mysterious Mr. Calder who walks with the Marchbanks companion and lends her books, and no soul in 20 miles has thought to connect that gentleman with the Duke of Calderstone, because the Duke of Calderstone has not shown his face in society these 3 years, and there's scarce a person living who'd know it if he did." Halloran set his broad hands on the desk. "My lord, Everard, this cannot hold." "I know it," Everard said. "Do you? Then you'll know how it ends. Either you tell that young woman who you are, and soon, gently, before she hears it elsewhere, or it comes out sideways, in some fashion you cannot govern, and then it looks like what it is not. It looks like a great man amusing himself with a poor woman under a false name. It looks like the very cruelty those ballroom cats meant to do her." The old man's voice roughened. "I've served your house since your father's day. I held you the night your lady died. I'll not stand by and watch you make yourself, without meaning it, into the villain of the piece." Everard rose and went to the window where his own reflection hung against the black glass, a tall dark shape in a dark room. "You think I do not know all this," he said. "You think I have not lain awake with it. Halloran, I meant to tell her the second time we met, and the third, and every time since. And every time I have looked at her and thought, the moment I say those words she is gone, not her person, herself. The woman who tells me the truth and calls Lady Marchbanks a fool and laughs at that wretched dog, she vanishes, and in her place stands a frightened girl bobbing curtsies to a duke, weighing every word for fear of her place, and he stopped. His hand had closed hard on the sill. I have had 3 years of people afraid of me. She is the one soul in the world who is not, and I am a coward, and I cannot bear to lose it. The silence stretched. Then you had better court her honest and quick, Halloran said at last, more gently, for you are courting her, my lord, whatever you call it to yourself. And a woman like that she'll forgive a great man his rank. What she'll not forgive is being made a fool of. Tell her before she can feel the fool. That's my counsel, and you may do as you please with it, as you always do. I will tell her, Everard said. Soon, when I am certain of her and she of me, when the ground is firm enough under us both that a title cannot knock it from beneath her feet. He believed it when he said it. He did not yet know how little time the world meant to allow him. For the trouble was already brewing, and its source was a jealousy he had planted himself without a thought. Cassia Vaughan had not forgotten the ball. She had set her cruel little dare expecting a scarecrow's rebuff and a gray woman's humiliation, and she had watched instead a tall, commanding stranger dance a full set with her victim, and quit the room without a glance at the reigning belle of the county, and it had lodged in her like a splinter under the nail. Miss Vaughan was accustomed to being the most looked-at woman in any room. She had spent the week since discovering, with mounting fury, that the mysterious and clearly wealthy Mr. Calderstone, a man, did not dress so, or ride such horseflesh on nothing, showed not the smallest interest in her charms, and a marked and growing interest in the drab nobody she had meant to crush. Everard was aware of her the way a man walking in fine weather is aware of a distant darkening at the edge of the sky. He saw Cassia Vaughan at the assemblies he now, astonishingly, attended, saw her watch him and Rowena over the rim of her fan, saw her draw the foppish Lord Pruitt aside and whisper, the two golden heads bent together, and laugh in a way that had no mirth in it. He thought little of it. He had faced down men across the breadth of a continent. He did not fear a spiteful girl and her tame fool. That was the arrogance of a man who had forgotten how the small, polite world worked, how it did its killing not with swords but with whispers, not to the face but to the ear, and how the surest way to destroy a woman who owned nothing but her character was to breathe upon that character until it clouded. Cassia Vaughan understood this in her bones, and Lord Pruitt, whom Everard dismissed as a fool, was a fool with debts, and a fool with debts is a dangerous and biddable thing. But that reckoning was still some weeks off, and in the meanwhile there came a bright morning that Everard would remember for the rest of his life as the last of the untroubled ones. He had ridden to Netherstowe. The limes were in full leaf. Rowena came along the gravel with the detestable spaniel and a book under her arm, his book, the poems, read now so often the spine had softened, and she was smiling before she reached him, and when she reached him she said, "You were right about the poet. He can write. There is one I have near by heart. I shall not tell you which, for you would laugh." "I would not," said Everard. "You would, it is the sentimental one." She was laughing herself. About the man who loved and lost and thought himself finished with the world, and then. "And then," he said. She looked up at him, and the laughter faded into something graver and warmer and, he thought, frightened, as she had been frightened crossing the ballroom floor, and for the same reason, because she was about to say a true thing at some risk to herself. "And then he found he was not finished after all," she said softly. "That is all, that is the whole of the poem." And Everard, standing in the green morning with the woman who had unshuttered his heart, came within a single breath of telling her everything: his name, his rank, his grief, and the thing that was growing between them that he had no more right to name than she did. When the spaniel, that detestable animal, set up a furious yapping, and Lady Marchbanks's voice cut across the garden calling for her companion, and the moment folded up and put itself away. "I must go," Rowena said. "She wants her drops. Thursday, Mr. Calder." "Thursday," he said. He watched her walk back toward the dowager's bench, and he resolved that on Thursday he would tell her, that he would find the words in the private hour and lay it all before her, and whatever came of it would be honest. But the storm that had been gathering at the edge of the bright sky broke before Thursday came. There was an assembly at Netherstowe Rooms in the third week of that acquaintance, a lesser affair than the Ashcombe ball but crowded enough, and Everard went to it for one reason only, which he was now honest enough with himself to name, because Rowena would be there, in attendance on Lady Marchbanks, and he wished to dance with her again where the dance need not be dared but only asked. He arrived to find the rooms already thick with talk of him, or rather of the mysterious Mr. Calder, whose plain name and fine horses and marked attention to the Marchbanks' companion had become the county's favorite riddle. He heard it eddying about him as he crossed the floor. Who was he? Where had he come from? What did a man of such evident means want with a portionless nobody? And he let it wash past him, for none of it came near the truth, and the truth was the one thing he could not yet afford to have guessed. Lady Marchbanks had installed herself upon the best sofa in the card-room, and Rowena stood behind her chair with a shawl over her arm and the dowager's smelling salts and fan at the ready, doing the 1,000 small, invisible offices that were her trade. Everard watched her a moment from the doorway before she saw him. It struck him, and not for the first time, how much of her life was spent standing behind other people's chairs, holding other people's shawls, being addressed only to be sent on errands and otherwise not addressed at all, as though she were a convenience with a pulse. He had lived his whole life on the other side of that arrangement, waited upon by people he had scarcely troubled to see, and it shamed him now, the long carelessness of it, as he watched Rowena fetch and fetch again with her unfailing patient grace. He crossed to the sofa and bowed to Lady Marchbanks, who bridled and simpered and was delighted, and he paid her the exact tribute of small talk that such a woman fed upon, and then he said, as though it were an afterthought and not the sole purpose of his evening, "I wonder, madam, whether you would spare your companion for a dance. It seems hard she should stand at every assembly and never once take the floor. Will you permit it?" Lady Marchbanks's little eyes went sharp and calculating. She was not a clever woman, but she was a suspicious one, and the notice a rich stranger paid her drab companion had begun to trouble her vanity, for she did not like her possessions admired. Yet she could think of no graceful way to refuse so distinguished a gentleman before half the room, and vanity of another kind the pleasure of having so notable a man solicit a favor of her one out. "Oh, as you like, she said, with a wave of her fat bearinged hand, as one gives away a thing of no value. "Though I cannot think what you find to divert you there. Go along, Selwyn, since the gentleman is so whimsical, and mind you are back before the tea." Everard offered his arm. He felt Rowena's hesitation, saw the flush of mingled pleasure and wariness in her face, and understood it. Every notice he paid her in public was a risk to her, and she knew it better than he, and she was weighing again, as she always weighed, the fleeting joy against the standing danger. But she took his arm. He had come to learn that about her, that she chose joy where she could, having so little of it, and paid the reckoning after. They danced. It was a country dance, all figures and partings and comings together, and it gave them only fragments of speech, but the fragments were enough. "You have made Lady Marchbanks your friend for life," Rowena murmured, coming to him down the set. "She will talk of the whimsical Mr. Calder for a fortnight. You have no notion what you have done." "I had a notion of dancing with you," said Everard. "The rest is chaff." "It is not chaff to me," she said low, as the figure turned her away and back. "You spend your attentions freely, sir, because you can. A man like you, forgive me, may be as whimsical as he pleases, and the world calls it charming. But every whim of yours that lights on me is remarked and stored, and will one day be counted against me. I do not say this to reproach you. I say it because you seem not to know it, and a person ought to know the weight of what he carries lightly." The words went into him, for they were true, and they were the kind of truth no one had told him in years, that his freedom was purchased at the cost of hers, that what was play for him was hazard for her. He had the grace to be ashamed. "You are right," he said, "and I have been careless of it. I will be more careful." Then, unable to help himself as the dance brought her near, "But I will not be so careful as to stop asking you to dance. That much whim I mean to keep." She looked up at him, and the wariness in her face warred with something warmer and lost to it, and she said nothing. But she did not take her hand from his when the figure would have allowed it, and they finished the set with their eyes more often on each other than on the pattern, and the whole watching room saw it, and stored it, and one pair of eyes in particular stored it with a cold and growing malice. For Cassia Vaughan was at the Netherstowe assembly, and Cassia Vaughan was not accustomed to standing unpartnered at the edge of a floor, while the most interesting man in the room danced twice over with a companion in a turned gown. She had come expecting to reign, as she reigned everywhere, and she found herself instead an onlooker at another woman's triumph, and it curdled in her. She was too clever to show it broadly. She only watched and smiled, and made a light poisonous jest or two to her set about the drab little upstart who had got above herself and the whimsical gentleman who would soon tire of slumming. And she filed the injury away with the injury of the first ball, and the two together began to harden in her into a purpose. Everard felt the chill of her regard across the room and thought little of it. He returned Rowena to Lady Marchbanks's sofa before the tea, as bidden and bowed, and did not linger, for he had taken her counsel to heart and would not heap fuel on the talk. But before he left her he said, quietly, under the cover of restoring the shawl to her arm, "There is a thing I should like to show you. The house I am settled in has grounds that run down to a stretch of river, very quiet, where herons fish of a morning and no one comes. Lady Marchbanks walks her spaniel in the public gardens, but a companion might walk a little farther afield on her half-day, might she not, and see a heron, and meet a friend there by the accident of his walking the same path?" "A companion might," said Rowena, "if the friend were very discreet and the accident very well arranged." "The friend is nothing if not a good arranger of accidents," said Everard gravely, and had the reward of her stifled laugh, and left the assembly with the heron and the half-day settled between them, and a lightness in his chest he had not felt in years. The river walks became the best hours of that whole bright stretch of weeks. On the wide quiet reach below the grounds, it was Calderstone's own river, though he did not tell her so, and the herons were Calderstone's herons. They walked and talked with a freedom the public gardens never allowed, out of sight of the county's storing eyes, and Everard came to know her mind the way a man learns a country by walking it, ridge by valley, until he holds the whole of it and loves the whole of it. She had read more than most gentlemen, in stolen hours, out of other people's libraries. She had thought about what she read. She disagreed with him roundly and often and was frequently in the right of it, and he found, to his own astonishment, that being told he was wrong by Rowena Selwyn gave him a pleasure that being flattered by duchesses never had. She told him of her father, the poor scholar parson, of the little rectory of her childhood full of books and short of coal, of the happiness of those years before the fever took both her parents in a single fortnight and dropped her, at 11, into the cold charity of relations who counted every mouthful she ate. She told it without bitterness, as she told everything, but he heard the cold under it, and he found himself wanting, with an intensity that frightened him, to be the warmth that answered it, to build round this woman a life in which no one ever again counted her mouthfuls or her worth. He did not say so. It was too soon, and there was the great unspoken thing of his name standing between every honest word, and he told himself again that he would clear that ground before he built on it. But he began, on those river walks, to imagine a Rowena at Calderstone, Rowena in the unshuttered library, Rowena's laugh in the cold rooms, and the imagining was so sweet and so forbidden that he half feared it, the way a man long numb fears the pain of returning feeling. Halloran, who had the whole of the estate to keep, and a master to worry over besides, took to appearing on the river path himself of a half-day, gruff and ostensibly about some business of the water meadows, in truth to see with his own eyes the woman who had done what 3 years of physicians and clergymen and concerned relations had failed to do, and brought the young duke back to life. He was civil to her and watchful and said little, but he came away from those meetings shaken, for he saw at once what his master was too deep in to see plainly, that this was no passing whim, that the Duke of Calderstone was in a fair way to loving a portionless companion with his whole recovered heart, under a false name, in a county full of storing eyes and one pair of jealous ones. And that such a thing could end only in a wedding or a wreck, and that the road to the first ran straight through a reckoning the master kept putting off. "You'll have to tell her, my lord," he said again, on the ride home from one such meeting, the low sun gilding the water meadows. "Every day you don't, the fall grows higher." "I know it," said Everard, watching the herons rise. "Soon, Halloran, when the ground is firm." But the ground was never quite firm enough for a coward's courage, and the storing eyes were patient, and the jealous ones were already, that very week, beginning to make their inquiries at the Calderstone gates. The storm's first thunder was a small thing, and it came, as such things often do, disguised as a mercy. There was a groom at the Netherstowe posting inn, a lad of perhaps 19 named Tom Ferris, whom Everard had marked on his rides for the sure kind hands the boy had with a nervous horse. The lad walked with a bad limp, a leg broken in childhood and set crooked by a farrier who knew nothing of bones, and he bore it without complaint and did the work of two despite it. Everard, who noticed the overlooked because he had lately learned to, had fallen into the way of a word with the boy when he stabled his horse, and had discovered him honest, gentle, and frightened half to death of losing his place, for the inn's new proprietor thought a lame groom bad for custom, and looked for a reason to turn him off. It was Rowena who told Everard the rest of it, one gray Thursday when the rain kept them under the library's portico. Tom Ferris had a mother, a widow, ailing, wholly dependent on the boy's wages. If the lad lost his place, the pair of them would go on the parish, which in that county meant the workhouse, which meant they would be separated, the mother to the women's ward and the son to the men's, likely never to see each other living again. Rowena knew because she had carried broth to the widow Ferris on her rare half-days, quietly, from her own scant means, telling no one. "I cannot do much," she said, twisting her wet gloves, ashamed almost to be caught at charity. "A companion's wage is a companion's wage, but I could not bear that the boy should be turned off for a crooked leg he came by at 7 years old. It is not just, Mr. Calder. There is so little justice for people who begin with nothing. I know that better than most." Everard looked at her soaked, threadbare, giving from her want to a want still greater, and felt something in his chest that was very close to pain and not far from worship. "Leave the boy to me," he said. "You must not. It is not your affair. You have already been too." "Miss Selwyn," he said it gently, but it stopped her. "You have taught me a thing these weeks that I had forgotten, which is that a man's affairs are exactly as wide as his heart chooses to make them. Leave the boy to me. I promise you Tom Ferris will not lose his place, nor his mother her son. You have my word, and my word, the ghost of a grim smile, is better than you know." He was as good as it. It cost him a letter and a quiet application of consequence he was careful to keep faceless. A word reached the inn's proprietor from a quarter he dared not offend, and it was made plain to that gentleman that the lame groom was under a protection he would be unwise to disturb, and that a position had besides been secured for the widow Ferris as a pensioner in a comfortable almshouse endowed, though no one said so, from Calderstone. Tom Ferris kept his place. His mother left her cold room for a warm one, and neither of them ever knew the name of the tall, dark gentleman who had saved them, only that Miss Selwyn's grave, kind friend Mr. Calder had somehow, miraculously, set it right. But Rowena saw. She was too quick not to. She said nothing at first. She only looked at him, over the widow's mended fortunes, with a new and searching wonder, as one who has glimpsed the edge of something vast and half-hidden. "You are not what you seem, Mr. Calder," she said to him at last, on the almshouse step, watching the widow Ferris settle by her new fire. Her voice was low. "A man does not command such things with a letter. A man of no particular consequence cannot pluck a boy from ruin and house a widow with a word. I have watched you do a thing this week that only great wealth or great rank could do, and do it so quietly you thought I would not notice. But I noticed." She turned to him, and her gray eyes were troubled, not with fear, but with the effort of a mind refusing an easy answer. "Who are you, truly?" Here it was again, and again he flinched from it, and this time he had less excuse than ever, for she had all but laid the truth in his hand. He could have said it on that almshouse step, with the widow's fire warm behind them and the boy saved between them. He should have. He would spend long nights later reproaching himself that he did not. But he was a coward in this one thing, and the fear was old and strong. Say it and lose her. So he took the middle path that cowards take, which is the worst of all, being neither the lie nor the truth. "I'm a man with more means than I let the world see," he said, which was true, "and reasons to keep quiet that have to do with an old grief and not with any wish to deceive you," which was also true, and left out the one thing that mattered. "I am asking you to trust me a little longer, Miss Selwyn. There is a thing I must tell you, and I mean to tell it, and I mean to tell it properly and wholly and not on a doorstep. Will you give me that? Will you trust that the man you have walked with these weeks is honest at the root, whatever he has kept back?" She studied him for a long moment. And then, because she was generous, because she had decided long ago to keep her good humor and her good faith against a world that had earned neither, she nodded. "I will trust you," she said. "I have no very good reason to, except that I have come to know your face better than my own, and I do not believe it is a lying face. Do not make a fool of me, Mr. Calder. I could bear a great many things. I do not think I could bear that, not from you." "You never shall," he said, and meant it with his whole soul, and did not know that within the fortnight she would believe he had done exactly that. They walked back through the town in a rain that had softened to mist, and it was on that walk, sheltering a moment in the arch of the churchyard gate while a downpour passed, that the false dawn broke over them, the brightest hour before the dark. She had asked him lightly about his grief, since he had named it, not to pry, she said, only that he need not carry it alone in her company if he would rather set it down. And Everard, for the first time since the black years, set it down. He told her of his wife, not her name, not yet, for the name was Calderstone's and would give him away, but the truth of her. A marriage arranged and grown into affection, a gentle woman, her long-hoped childbed, the son born small and struggling, the 9 days of desperate hope, and then the 2 graves dug within a week of each other and himself left standing between them, 34 years old and hollowed out to the bone. He told her how he had shuttered the great house and gone abroad and come back no better, only quieter, a ghost keeping a ghost's hours. He told her he had come to that country meaning to sell up and vanish for good. Rowena listened the way she did everything wholly, without flinching, without the ready, useless sorries. When he had finished, she did not touch him, for they were in a public place and she was careful of them both, but she stood very near and she said, "Thank you for telling me, I shall carry it gently." A pause, and then, with the directness he had come to love, "You said you came here meaning to vanish. Do you still mean to?" And Everard, looking at her upturned face in the gray churchyard light, the mist beating on the escaped strands of her hair, said the truest thing he had said in 3 years. "No," he said, "I find I do not. I find I want very much to stay." Neither of them spoke for a moment. The rain came down beyond the arch. It was not a declaration. The world's careful forms did not allow it to be, not yet, not until he had told her the thing he had still not told her. But it was as near to one as made no difference, and she knew it, and the color rose in her face, and she looked down and then up again, and she said unsteadily, "Then I am glad. I am very glad, Mr. Calder." And for one breathless, suspended instant, sheltered from the world in the churchyard arch, his hand found hers and held it, bare fingers to bare fingers, for her glove was wet and off, and the small warm shock of that touch was the whole of his happiness poured into a single point. It was the last wholly happy moment he was to have for a long and bitter while. For across the square, unseen by either under the awning of the milliner's shop, stood Cassia Vaughan. She had come to the town to match a ribbon and had stayed to watch from the shadow of the awning, a sight that turned her fair face to something hard and white. The mysterious Mr. Calder, who had slighted her at the ball and ignored her all the season, sheltering in a churchyard arch with the drab Selwyn woman, holding her ungloved hand, looking down at her with a face that even at that distance was unmistakably the face of a man in love. Kasha Vaughn stood very still. And into her jealousy, hot and ready, there fell at that very moment the one piece of knowledge that would make her cruelty deadly, for she had heard it not an hour since from her uncle, who dealt in land, and had thought nothing of it until now. Her uncle had told her, over his morning chocolate, that the great shuttered estate of Calderstone had come quietly to life again these 2 months past. Covers off the windows, smoke from the chimneys, the master returned. And that the master, the Duke of Calderstone himself, that famous recluse whom almost no living soul in the county had ever set eyes upon, was said to be a tall dark man of middle years, lately much abroad, who had taken to riding the Netherstowe road under a plain name, folk said, to go about unknown. A plain name, a tall dark man, the Netherstowe road. Kasha Vaughn looked across the square at the tall dark man holding the poor companion's hand, and she began, slowly, to smile. She did not yet act. That was the worst of it. Everard would think afterward, that she held the knowledge close and let it ripen, choosing the cruelest hour and the cruelest use. She went home and made her inquiries, quietly, through her uncle and through a groom bribed at the Calderstone gates, and within 3 days she was as certain as certainty that the man who called himself Mr. Calder, who lent books to a companion and rescued lame grooms and sheltered nobodies from the rain, was Everard, 7th Duke of Calderstone, one of the greatest men in the kingdom, worth 40,000 a year. And she understood, with the swift wicked cleverness that had made her the terror of every drawing-room in the county, exactly how to turn that truth into a weapon that would cut 2 ways at once: destroy the upstart companion who had bested her, and punish the arrogant duke who had slighted her, and lose Kasha Vaughn nothing at all. The instrument lay ready to her hand. Lord Pruitt owed money everywhere, most of all to Kasha's own uncle, and Kasha had lately learned that the foppish lord had done a worse thing than merely fall into debt. He had, to stave off his creditors, forged a note of hand in another gentleman's name, a hanging matter or near it, and Kasha knew of it. She had the fool entire. She had only to tell him what to do and threaten him with the gallows if he balked, and Lord Pruitt would do anything at all. What she told him to do was simple, and it began with a whisper. The whisper reached Everard first. Oddly, before it reached its true target, reached him at his club in the county town, where he had gone to sign the papers that saved the widow Ferris, and heard 2 men laughing behind a newspaper about the famous reclusive Duke of Calderstone, who it seemed had grown tired of his own consequence, and was amusing himself dressed as a plain gentleman, gulling the country folk, walking out with some poor companion under a false name for the sport of it, and would no doubt drop the drab when the joke grew stale, as such great men always did. Everard set down his glass so hard it cracked. He knew in that instant that his time was gone. The thing he had feared and delayed and told himself he would do properly, in his own hour gently, had slipped out of his hands into the hands of his enemies, and it was being told already in the ugliest possible shape. Not the truth, that a grieving man had hidden his rank to keep the one honest friendship of his life, but the lie that a bored aristocrat had toyed with a helpless woman for amusement. And he knew, with a cold, plunging certainty, who had shaped that lie, and he knew that if it had reached his ears at the club it was reaching, at that very hour, the ears he could least bear it to reach. He was on his horse and on the Netherstowe road within the quarter hour, riding as though he could outrun the whisper. He could not. The whisper had wings, and it had flown ahead of him, and it had already found the one person in the world he would have died to keep it from. Kasha Vaughn had chosen her hour with an artist's cruelty. She had waited for the dowager's card evening, when Lady Marchbanks kept open rooms and half the county came and went, so that the thing might be done not in private, where it could be softened, but in a crowded drawing-room before as many witnesses as possible, where the wound would be a public wound and could never be unmade. Everard reached the house too late. He had ridden his horse near to Founder and given it up at the gate and come the last of the way on foot, into a house ablaze with candles and loud with the wrong kind of laughter, the laughter of a room that has been given a delicious cruelty to feed on. He knew that sound. He had grown up among people who made that sound. And he heard, cutting across it, before he had well got through the door, Cassia Vaughan's clear, sweet-carrying voice, raised for the whole assembly, in a performance of tender concern that was the ugliest thing he had ever heard. And so I felt, dear Miss Selwyn, that you truly ought to know before you make yourself any more the talk of the county. It is not kind to let you go on in ignorance. Only fancy, you believed you had made a conquest. You, a companion, believed a great gentleman walked out with you for love. A soft laugh echoed by Prewitt's set. My dear, he is the Duke of Calderstone. Everard, 7th Duke, 40,000 a year, one of the first men in England. And he has spent this whole season dressed as a plain nobody, calling himself Mr. Calder, walking you about the gardens and the churchyards for his private amusement. It is the talk of every club in the county. The great Duke playing at courtship with a poor drab to relieve his boredom. And you never knew. You held his hand in the rain, they say, and you never knew you were being made the greatest fool in 3 counties. Everard came into the doorway of the drawing-room. He saw the whole of it in one terrible photograph of a moment. The crowded bright room, the staring faces, avid and half-ashamed, the way faces are at a hanging. Cassia Vaughan in gold, luminous with triumph, her fan poised. Lord Prewitt smirking at her shoulder. Lady Marchbanks rising purple from her chair. And in the center of it, alone, standing very straight as she had stood the night of the ball with the whole room's cruelty upon her Rowena. She was not weeping. That was the worst of it. She stood white and dry-eyed and perfectly still, the way a creature stands when it has been struck too hard to feel the blow yet, and she was looking not at Cassia Vaughan but at the door, at him, at Everard, because in the pause after Cassia's words she had turned, some instinct turning her, and she had seen him standing there in his plain coat with his rank written now all over him, and he watched the truth of it land in her face. He watched her believe it. He would carry that instant to his grave. The moment Rowena Selwyn looked at the man she had trusted and saw, not the friend she had walked with, but the Duke of Calderstone, a great man in a poor man's coat, caught out, and believed because the whole room told her so, and because his own long silence seemed to shout it, that she had been made sport of exactly as the ballroom cats had first meant to make sport of her. That the kindness had been a game, the confidences a diversion, the hand held in the churchyard rein a great man's idle cruelty, that she had been, all along, the greatest fool in 3 counties. Rowena, he said. Her name, her Christian name, breaking from him in front of them all, and it was a confession and a plea, and it damned him utterly, for a stranger does not so name a lady, and every soul in the room heard in it the proof of everything Cassia had said. Is it true? Rowena said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, and it went through the noisy room like a blade, and the room fell silent to hear it. Are you the Duke of Calderstone? Yes, he said, there was no other answer, but— And your name is not Calder? It is, it was my family's name before the title. It was not wholly Rowena, let me. But you are the Duke of Calderstone, she said, and you knew at every hour that you let me believe you a plain gentleman. Every hour, Mr. Calder, when you lent me the book, when you told me your grief in the churchyard, when her voice did not break, she would not let it, but something moved behind her eyes that was worse than breaking. When I told you I was glad you meant to stay, you knew and you let me. You let me stand here tonight and be told before all these people a thing you might have told me gently in kindness at any hour of any of those days and did not. She drew a breath. You made a fool of me exactly as she meant to, only slower, and it hurt more coming from you because I trusted you. I told you I could bear anything but that, and you did it anyway. That is not what it was, Everard said. His voice was low and shaking with an urgency he could not master. Rowena, before God, that is not what it was. I hid my name because I was a coward, not because you were a jest. Because you were the one person alive who did not fear me, and I could not bear to lose it. Every word I spoke to you was true. Every hour was true. I was going to tell you, Thursday I swear to you I meant to tell you. Thursday, she repeated, and something that was almost a laugh, terrible and small, escaped her. Yes, I dare say. There is always a Thursday coming for men like you. A better hour, a softer moment, always just ahead in which the great man will finally condescend to be honest with the little woman. And the little woman is meant to wait for it and be grateful, and never mind that she has been walking blind through her own life for 2 months while he decided when she might be trusted with the truth of who he was. She lifted her chin. You did not lie with your tongue, my lord. I will grant you that. You lied with your silence every day, and that is a colder thing, and I did not think you were a cold man. That is my whole error. I thought you were warm and you were only bored. Rowena, you will not call me that. It came out at last with an edge, the first crack in the awful control. You have not the right, you never had it. I gave my friendship to a Mr. Calder who does not exist, and the man who does exist is a stranger to me and a duke, and I am a dismissed companion, and there is nothing more to be said between us at all. Dismissed. The word had barely left her when Lady Marchbanks, swollen with outrage, not at Cassia, not at the cruelty, but at her companion for having drawn scandal upon the house, for having been the innocent center of a spectacle, for the unforgivable crime of having been noticed made the ruin literal. You will pack your box tonight, the dowager said, in the flat, vicious voice of a small mind savoring its one power. I'll not keep a companion who is the byword of the county, who carries on with dukes in churchyards like I'll not say the word. You'll have no character from me, miss. Not a line. Let us see how your fine friends serve you now. And she turned her fat bearing back, and the thing was done. Rowena Selwyn, who owned nothing in the world but her character, had had it stripped from her before 40 witnesses, and had nowhere on earth to go. Everard's control broke then, but it broke wrongly in the way that made everything worse. It broke into the Duke of Calderstone, cold and terrible, rounding on the room with 3 years of buried grief and present fury in his face, and the room shrank from it. You will be silent, he said to Lady Marchbanks, and his voice was the voice that had commanded men, and it filled the room and froze it. Every soul in this house tonight has fed on a cruelty got up by that woman. His eyes went to Cassia Vaughan, who did not shrink, who smiled, and you have all of you enjoyed it, and there is not one of you fit to speak Miss Selwyn's name. As for you, madam. My lord flatters me, said Cassia Vaughan sweetly, with so much attention, but it will not mend matters. You have ruined the creature yourself, you know, simply by noticing her. That is the way of it with great men and little women. You cannot touch us without breaking us, and then you are surprised at the breakage. Her smile widened. You should have left her in the gray where she belonged, but you would play your game, and here is the end of it. And the dreadful thing was that in that one poison particular she was right, and Everard knew it, and the knowing struck him dumb. He had ruined her, not meaning to, but as surely as if he had meant it. His notice, his silence, his coward's delay, these had taken a woman who was safe in her obscurity and dragged her into a light that burned her to nothing. Every word he spoke now in her defense only fanned the fire, for a duke defending a dismissed companion before a crowded room was the surest way in the world to confirm the scandal and finish her. He saw it. He saw that his love, spoken here, would kill what little of her was left. And so the one thing he could do for her, in that moment, the only mercy left to him, was the cruelest thing of all. To say nothing more, to let her go, to stand still and silent and let her walk out of the room with the rags of her dignity, rather than complete her ruin by fighting for her in front of the very world that fed on them both. He stood still. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He let her go. Rowena Selwyn crossed the drawing-room floor for the second time in her life through a lane of staring, whispering faces. Only this time she was walking away from him, not toward him, and there was no dance at the end of it, only the cold and the dark and a packed box in the road. She did not look at him as she passed. At the door she paused, just for a breath, her back to the room, and Everard thought she might turn, and his whole soul leaned toward it. She did not turn. She went out. And the door closed, and the room let out its held breath in a rush of delighted, horrified chatter, and Cassia Vaughan's laugh rose over it like a bright, cruel bird. Everard stood in the middle of the ruin he had made and had let be made in his plain coat that fooled no one now, the Duke of Calderstone entire and exposed and utterly, absolutely alone. He had come back from 3 years of grief to find one warm, honest thing in the world, and he had, through cowardice and delay and the simple crime of being who he was, destroyed it in an evening. He had let her believe he had never loved her. He had let a poison stand in the place of the truth. He had let her walk out into the night with nothing. That was the lowest point. That was the dark hour. He rode home to Calderstone through the black country, and the great house rose before him with its windows lit for the first time in 3 years. He had lit them, these past weeks, in some foolish hope, and it looked to him now like a lantern lit for no one, and he went into it and sat alone in the unshuttered library among his books and his ghosts. And for a long time the 7th Duke of Calderstone, one of the first men in England, worth 40,000 a year, put his head in his hands and did not move at all. Halloran found him there at dawn, where he had sat all the night, and did not offer comfort, which was not his way, but stood in the grey light and said the one thing Everard needed to hear. "So you'll give her up, then," the steward said. It was not a question, it was a goad dressed as one. "You'll sit here in the dark and grieve her the way you grieved your lady 3 years of shudders and call it love. That's the easy road, my lord. You know it well. You've walked it before." Everard lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and terrible. "I have destroyed her, Halloran. You did not see her face. Whatever I do now only feeds the fire. If I go to her, if I so much as speak her name in that county, I finish what the Vaughan woman began. The kindest thing I can do for Rowena Selwyn is to let her go and never darken her life again." "And is that what she'd want?" Halloran said. "Or is that what's easiest for you, to call your cowardice a kindness, same as you've done these 2 months? You told yourself hiding your name was kindness. That went well." The old man came and stood over him, unafraid, as he had been unafraid at the master's cradle. "You listen to me now, for I've earned the saying of it. That young woman was not ruined by your notice. She was ruined by a lie got up by a spiteful girl and a debt-ridden fool told a purpose to break her. A lie can be unmade, my lord, if a man's willing to do the work and take the cost, but not by sitting in the dark. You want to make it right. Then stop grieving her like she's dead and start fighting for her like she's living. She's out there this morning with a packed box and no character and no place. Where's your consequence now? Where's your 40,000 a year, if it can't find one woman a roof and clear one lie?" Everard rose. Something had come into his face that Halloran had not seen there in 3 years, not since before the black time. The look of a man who has remembered that he is not, in fact, helpless. That grief had taught him to lie down, but that he had once been a man who acted, who commanded, who did not accept what the world dealt him if the world dealt wrongly. The Duke of Calderstone was a great man, and a great man's power was a heavy and a dangerous thing, and he had let it rust these 3 years for want of anything he cared enough to lift it for. He cared now. "Find her," he said. "Before anything else, I do not care what it costs or whom you must wake. A woman turned off at midnight with no character does not go far and does not go safe. Find her, see her housed, see her fed, and see it done in a way that does not touch her name further through the almshouse, through the fairest woman, through anyone but me. She must not know it is my hand. She would refuse it, and she would be right to, but she will be safe. Go." "And you, my lord?" Everard was already moving, already the strategist, the night's ruin hardening in him into purpose. "I am going to unmake a lie," he said. "The Vaughan woman built her cruelty on a truth twisted, that I hid my name. I cannot deny the truth, but I can drag the whole of it into the light, all of it, hers as well as mine, and we shall see whose looks blacker by day. Send to town for everything that can be learned of Lord Prewitt's affairs. A man does not become the tool of a woman like Cassia Vaughan for love. He does it because she holds something over him. Find me what it is." It took 9 days, and they were 9 of the worst days of Everard's life, for he did not see her, would not let himself, and had only Halloran's terse reports that she was found, that she was safe, that she was lodged with the widow Ferris in the almshouse cottage, the 2 poor women keeping each other, and that she was proud and quiet and asked for nothing, and did not know the roof over her had anything to do with Calderstone. Everard read these reports and set them down and walked the length of his long gallery half the night, and did not go to her, and it was the hardest abstinence of his life, and he held to it because he understood at last that he could not come to Rowena Selwyn with anything less than the whole truth cleared and the whole lie broken. To come to her sooner with his rank and his 40,000 a year and his fine words would be only to offer her, once more, the great man's condescension she had every reason to loathe. He would come to her when he came clean, or he would not come at all. The intelligence, when it was assembled, was worse and better than he had hoped. Worse, because Cassia Vaughan's malice went deeper than a ballroom grudge. She had made it a project, bribing a groom at his own gates to confirm his identity, coaching Prewitt in the very words to whisper, choosing the card evening for the maximum of witnesses. Better, because in reaching for so much she had left her flank open, and the open flank was Lord Prewitt. Prewitt was drowning in debt. That was known. What was not known, what Halloran's man dug out of a frightened attorney's clerk over a great deal of brandy, was that some months since, to hold off the worst of his creditors, Lord Prewitt had forged the signature of his own uncle, Sir Marmaduke Prewitt, upon a note of hand for £1,200. A forgery, a felony, a hanging matter in that hard age, or transportation at the softest. Cassia Vaughan knew of it. Her own uncle, the land dealer, held some of Prewitt's paper and had stumbled on the fraud, and Cassia had got it from him, and she had used it. She had held the gallows over Lord Prewitt's foppish head and made him her creature, her whisperer, her tool in the ruin of Rowena Selwyn. Prewitt had not spread the poison for sport. He had spread it in terror of his life. Everard sat with this a long while, turning it in the cold, clear part of his mind. He had the whole of it now. He had the means to destroy Cassia Vaughan utterly, to expose her as the author of a deliberate cruelty, and to expose the forgery she had used to compel it, which would take Prewitt to the dock and Cassia's own name down into the mud with him, for a woman who conceals a felony to make a tool of a felon is no innocent. He could ruin them both. The old Everard, the one from before the grief, the young hard soldier, would have done it without a qualm and enjoyed the doing. But he had walked 2 months with Rowena Selwyn, and she had taught him a thing he had not known he needed to learn, which was that cruelty answered with cruelty only widens the wound in the world, and that the strong owe the weak their strength and not their vengeance. He did not want to hang Lord Prewitt. He did not even, he found, want to grind Cassia Vaughan to powder, satisfying as the thought had been at midnight. He wanted one thing only, to clear Rowena's name so wholly and so publicly that no whisper could ever touch it again, to lift her out of the gray and the shame into the light and the safety she deserved, and to do it in a way that was just and clean, and that Rowena herself, when she came to know of it, need never be ashamed to have been the cause of. That gave him his plan, and it was a subtler and a better thing than mere ruin. He would not go to the magistrates first, he would go to Prewitt. He sent for the young lord privately, and Lord Prewitt came, because a summons from the Duke of Calderstone was not a thing a small frightened man ignored, and he came into the great library at Calderstone white and sweating, and found the Duke waiting for him among the unshuttered books, and knew at once from the Duke's face that his sins had found him out. Everard did not rage. He was very quiet, which was worse. He laid the whole of it on the table between them, gently, item by item, the debts, the forged note, the attorney's clerk, the groom at the gate, Cassia Vaughan's coaching, the card evening, the ruin of an innocent woman, and he watched Lord Prewitt crumble, and when the young man was reduced to a shaking heap he offered him, not the gallows, but a choice. "You are a weak man, Prewitt," Everard said, "and weak men do great harm when strong bad ones get hold of them. I could send you to the dock tonight, and I have the proofs to hang you, and no power on earth could save you. I am not going to do it. I am going to give you a chance to be, for once in your wasted life, on the side of the truth, and if you take it, the forgery stays buried, your uncle's note is quietly redeemed, your worst debts are settled through a channel that need not shame you, and you have the rest of your days to make something better of yourself than a rich woman's lapdog. That is my offer. It is more mercy than you have earned and a great deal more than you gave Miss Selwyn." Prewitt, weeping now, asked what he must do. "Tell the truth," Everard said. "Once, publicly, where it will do the most good and undo the most harm. You will confess before the same society that watched you help to break her, exactly what was done to Rowena Selwyn and who did it and why. That the whole tale of the Duke amusing himself was a lie built to order, and that you were made to tell it and by whom and how. You will not spare Miss Vaughn, and you will not spare yourself. And when you have done it, you will be free of her forever, and so will Miss Selwyn, and so, God willing, will I. Lord Prewitt, who had spent his life doing the biddable thing out of fear, agreed at last to do one brave thing out of the same fear, which is perhaps the most that can be hoped from such men. And Everard, having secured his witness, set about arranging the stage. For it would have to be public as the ruin had been, and more so. Cassia Vaughan had chosen a crowded card-room to break Rowena before as many eyes as possible. Everard would choose an even greater gathering to mend her before more. There was to be, that fortnight, the grandest event of the county's year, the midsummer assembly at the Ashcombe Rooms, the very ballroom where the dare had first been spoken, where the whole of society would be gathered under one blaze of chandeliers. There, where it had begun, Everard determined it would end. There he would clear her name before the world, humble the proud, and lay his own concealed rank and grief and heart bare in the light for all to see. There remained one thing to do that he dreaded more than facing all of society at once. He had to go to Rowena, not to spring his plan upon her, not to sweep her up in his consequence, but to ask her, humbly, honestly, as an equal and not a duke, whether she would consent to be helped at all. For he had learned at last and at bitter cost that to do even a good thing to a proud woman without her leave was only another kind of taking her choice away, and he had taken enough of her choices. She might refuse him, she might send him from the almshouse door, she had every right, but he would not move another step in her cause without laying it and himself before her first. On the 10th morning, then, the Duke of Calderstone rode alone to a poor almshouse cottage, in his plainest coat, with no consequence about him and no plan but the truth, to face the woman he had wronged and loved, and to ask her, for the first time in his life truly asking and not arranging, whether she could ever forgive him. The 9 days of waiting worked upon Everard in ways he had not looked for. He had thought, when he set Halloran to find her and set himself to break the lie, that the labor would fill the time and dull the ache. And the labor did fill his days, but the nights were long, and in them he was forced to keep company with a truth he had spent 3 years refusing. He had loved once before. He had married Honoria in the ordinary way of his kind, a match of estates and families, and he had grown into a real if quiet affection for her. And when she and the child died within a week of each other, he had folded up his whole heart and put it away, believing it spent, believing a man was given one such loss and no more of anything after it. He had built his grief into a wall and lived behind it and called the wall peace, and had meant to die behind it in good time, decently, having troubled no one. That had been the sum of his ambition, to feel nothing and injure no one and quietly cease. And then a gray woman had crossed a ballroom floor and begged his pardon for doing something unpardonably forward, and the wall had come down brick by brick without his ever deciding to pull it, and he had discovered behind it not the spent ash he expected, but a whole living heart, hungrier and more capable of joy than the young man's heart he had married with. That was the thing the 9 nights taught him. He did not love Rowena Selwyn as a sad man loves a comfort, or as a great man loves a novelty. He loved her as the best and most alive part of himself, restored to him after he had given it up for dead, and the thought of failing her now, of letting cowardice or delay or the world's cruelty take her from him, a second time became a thing he could not endure and would not permit. It changed how he went about the work. He had begun it in a cold strategist's spirit, marshalling proofs, calculating exposures, planning the humbling of his enemies with the detached competence of the soldier he had been. But as the 9 nights wore on and taught him what she was to him, the work took on a different color. It became less a campaign against Cassia Vaughan and more a labor of restitution toward Rowena, and the difference showed in every choice he made. He found he did not want to win. He wanted to mend, and a man who wants to mend proceeds more carefully than a man who wants to win, and thinks harder about who else may be broken in the breaking of his enemies. He thought, for instance, about Sir Marmaduke Prewitt, the old uncle whose signature the young lord had forged. The forgery, dragged into the light, would shame the whole Prewitt name, the innocent old man with it. And Everard, who had learned from Rowena to see the people at the edges of a matter, arranged it otherwise. He went himself privately to Sir Marmaduke, a decent bewildered old gentleman who had no notion his nephew had used his name, and laid the thing before him gently, and offered, in exchange for the old man's silence and his help in steering the nephew straight, to redeem the forged note out of his own pocket and see the young fool's worst debts quietly settled, so that the felony need never come to court and the family need never be dragged through the mire. Sir Marmaduke wept and thanked him and agreed, and Everard came away having bought not only Prewitt's public confession but the old man's gratitude and the sparing of a name that had done no wrong, all of it done quietly, at his own cost, in a manner Rowena, when she learned of it, need never blush for. He thought, too, in those days about Lady Marchbanks. The dowager had done a cruel and a cowardly thing in casting Rowena off, but she had done it out of vanity and fear rather than deliberate malice, and Everard found he had no wish to crush a foolish old woman. It was enough that she should be brought, by the turning of the county's opinion, to understand what she had thrown away and to feel it. He let the great reckoning at the assembly do that work, and he had the private satisfaction, some weeks after, of hearing that Lady Marchbanks had told anyone who would listen that she had always known her Miss Selwyn was a superior young woman, and had been quite deceived by that dreadful Vaughan creature, and had wept to lose so treasured a companion. It was a lie, and everyone knew it was a lie, and it was exactly the sort of small self-serving revision by which small people make their peace with their own worst acts. And Everard, secure now in his happiness, found he could let the old woman have it, for magnanimity was cheap to a man who had everything, and Rowena had taught him that the strong owe the weak their forbearance and not their contempt. But of all the work of those 9 days, the hardest by far was the not going to her. A dozen times a day his whole body turned toward the almshouse road. A dozen times he mastered it. He had Halloran's daily word that she was safe, was fed, was housed, was proud and quiet and asking nothing, and each report was a comfort and a torment together, for it told him she lived and did not tell him whether she could ever forgive. He wrote her letters in the small hours and burned them all, for everyone, read again by daylight, seemed to him only another way of pressing his consequence upon her, of demanding to be answered, of taking rather than asking. He had done enough taking. He would go to her once, when the ground was cleared, and lay everything before her, and abide by whatever she chose, and until then he would leave her the one thing he had it in his power to give her, which was peace and space, and the dignity of being left alone with her own grief and her own decision. Halloran watched him hold to it and said one evening, gruff and moved, "You've changed, my lord. The man you were 3 months gone would have ridden down there the first night and carried her off, and settled it all with his own will and his own purse, and called it love and never asked her leave. This is a harder road you're walking and a better one. She taught you that." "She taught me everything worth knowing," said Everard, "in about 2 months, walking a detestable spaniel. I have been 40 years learning the rest of the world's lessons, and I doubt any of them were half so valuable." "Aye, well," said Halloran, who did not deal in sentiment and was embarrassed by his own. "Mind you don't lose her now, having got so wise. Wisdom's cold comfort in an empty house. I've watched you keep one of those. I'd not care to watch it twice." Everard did not answer, but the words stayed with him, for they named the fear that underlay all the rest. He had one great house standing empty of everything but ghosts. He knew to the marrow what such emptiness cost, and he knew that if Rowena refused him, as she had every right to do, as a proud and deeply injured woman, well might he would go back into that emptiness, and this time there would be no wall he could build high enough to keep out the knowledge of what he had thrown away. The stakes of the coming days were not merely her good name, though that mattered above all. They were, though he tried not to think of it so, his whole remaining life, whether it should be a warm one or a cold, whether the lit windows he had lit in foolish hope should shine for her or mock him. So he laid his plans with a care that was near to prayer. He arranged the great assembly. He secured Pruitt's confession and Sir Marmaduke's silence. He saw to the gown and the roses through a dozen discreet hands, so that if she consented to come, she should come clothed like the lady she was, and not the drab the county had labeled her, and yet nothing so grand that her pride would refuse it. He rehearsed nothing, for he had learned that his rehearsed speeches were the false ones and his broken honest ones the true. He meant to stand before her and before the world with nothing prepared but the truth, and let the truth do its own work as it had done from the first hour she spoke it to him. And on the 10th morning, having done all that a man could do to clear the ground, he could bear the abstinence no longer, and he rode to the almshouse cottage, not to spring his plan, not to sweep her up, but only to ask humbly, as he had promised himself, whether she would consent to be helped at all, and whether the friend she had grieved might in time be forgiven. He went with his heart in his mouth and his hat in his hand, the greatest man in the county, reduced to the plain condition of any man who has wronged the one he loves, and does not know whether love can outlast the wrong. Everything he had rebuilt of himself hung upon a poor woman kneeling in a garden of cabbages, and he knew it, and he would not have had it otherwise, for she was worth the whole of the hazard and more. The almshouse cottage was small and clean and very poor, a single room below and a loft above, a garden of cabbages and a few late roses, and Rowena Selwyn was in the garden when Everard came, on her knees in the black earth with her sleeves turned back, doing the work she had never in her sheltered, gentle-born life been raised to, and doing it without complaint. She had grown thinner in 10 days. She looked up at the sound of the gate, and when she saw who stood there the color went out of her face and then came back too hot, and she got to her feet slowly, wiping her earthen hands on her apron, and she did not curtsy and she did not speak. Everard took off his hat. He stood on the far side of the little gate, not presuming to come in, and he found that all the careful things he had meant to say had deserted him, and that he was more afraid than he had ever been before any enemy in his life. "I have no right to be here," he said at last. "I know it. If you tell me to go, I will go, and I will not trouble you again. But I have come to say some things that ought to have been said long ago, and I would rather say them badly to your face than never say them at all. Will you hear me? You need not forgive me. You need only hear me. That is all I ask." Rowena looked at him a long moment across the cabbages and the late roses. The proud thing in her wanted to send him off, he could see it, and the fair thing in her, the thing that had decided long ago to keep its good faith against a hard world, warred with it and won, as it had always won in her. "Say it then," she said. Her voice was steady and cool. "I have learned that it costs me too much to refuse to hear things. I refused to hear the whisper about you until it was screamed at me in a crowded room. I will not make that error twice. Say what you came to say." So he said it. He stood at the poor garden gate with his hat in his hands, the Duke of Calderstone stripped of every advantage of his rank, and he told her the truth, the whole of it, plainly and without excuse. He told her that he had hidden his name out of cowardice, and not out of sport. That after 3 years in which every human face had held either fear or greed, she had been the first and only person to treat him as a man and not a title, and that he had been so starved of it, so undone by it, that he had clung to the false name the way a drowning man clings to a spar, telling himself each day that he would confess the next, and never finding the courage, because he could not bear to watch her change toward him. He told her he had known it was wrong. He told her he had known it must end badly and had let it run on anyway, and that the fault was wholly his and the ruin that had come of it was wholly his, and that he did not ask her to excuse a particle of it. But he told her, too, the thing she had not known and had had no way to know, that not one word he had spoken to her in those 2 months had been false, that the grief in the churchyard was true grief, that the man who had lent her poems and saved a lame groom and held her hand in the rain was not a bored duke playing a part but the truest self he had been in 3 years, called back to life by her, and that the only lie he had told her was the lie of his name, and that every other hour had been the realest of his life. "You said I made a fool of you slowly," he said, and his voice was not steady now. "You said it hurt more coming from me because you had trusted me. Rowena, I know it did. I have not slept a night since for the knowledge of it. But I beg you to believe the one thing that matters, which is this: I did not court you to amuse myself. I courted you because I loved you. I love you now. I have loved you since you crossed that floor and told me the truth about a cruel dare when it would have been easier to let it fall on me. Everything since has been the truth wearing a false name, and I am here to take the false name off and stand before you as I am. A great man, yes, and a coward, and a fool, who loves you, and who has wronged you, and who does not deserve your pardon and cannot live easy without at least having asked it." For a long time Rowena did not speak. She stood with her earthen hands twisted in her apron and her eyes very bright, and Everard could not read what moved behind them, and he made himself bear the silence and not fill it, for he had filled too many silences with the wrong things. "Do you know what the cruelest part was?" she said at last, low. "In that room. It was not being made a fool of before all those people. I have been laughed at all my life. I have a thick skin for that. It was that in the space of one sentence I lost my friend. I had one friend in the world, Mr. Calder. I cannot call you the other name. I have not the habit. One person who I thought saw me and liked what he saw, and in one sentence I learned he had never existed, that I had poured my whole trust into a man who was not real. That was the grief, not the ruin, the loss of the only friendship I had ever had, and the belief that it had been counterfeit from the first hour." She drew a shaking breath. "And now you stand at my gate and tell me it was not counterfeit, that the friend was real, only the name was false. And I find I do not know whether that is a mercy or a fresh cruelty, because if it is true, if the friend was real, then I have grieved him for 10 days as dead, and here he is alive, and I am angry, and I am so tired, and I do not know what to do with any of it." "Then do nothing with it yet," Everard said gently. "You need decide nothing today. I did not come to press a suit or to be forgiven on the instant. That would be only another taking. I came for 2 things, and then I will leave you in peace as long as you wish it. The first was to tell you the truth, which I have done. The second is to ask your leave for something, and to abide by your answer whatever it is." He told her then of what he had learned: Cassia Vaughan's deliberate malice, Prewitt's forgery and his coerced part, the whole ugly machine that had been built to break her. He watched her understand that the ruin had not been the natural cruelty of the world falling on a woman who had risen above her station, as Cassia had made it seem, but a thing manufactured on purpose, aimed, fired. He watched a slow, hard anger of her own kindle at it, a clean anger, and something in him was glad to see it, for the meek despair of the last 10 days had frightened him more than fury would have. "I mean to clear your name," he said, "wholly and publicly, so that no whisper can ever touch it again. I have the proofs, and I have Prewitt's own confession, freely given. But I will not do it without your leave, Rowena, because it means bringing you again before the very society that shamed you, and standing you once more in the light you were burned in, and I have learned too late, at your cost, that a man has no right to arrange a woman's life for her, however kindly he means it, without asking whether she wishes it arranged. So I am asking, will you let me clear your name before them all? Or would you rather I destroyed the proofs and left you in peace and never troubled you or that world again? Say the word, and either shall be done. The choice is yours. It should always have been yours." And that, more than the confession, more than the love plainly spoken, was what moved her. He saw it move her. That he had come not to rescue her in the grand way that would have served his own conscience and his own consequence, but to hand her back the one thing everyone all her life had taken from her, which was her own choice in her own fate. She stood in the poor garden and looked at the great man asking her leave, and something in the set of her shoulders eased, and her eyes filled, and she pressed the back of one earthen hand quickly to her mouth and looked away over the cabbages until she had command of herself. "You have learned a great deal, my lord," she said at last unsteadily, "for so proud a man." "I had a good teacher," said Everard. She used to walk a detestable spaniel in the Netherstowe gardens and tell me hard truths I did not want to hear. A sound escaped Rowena that was half a laugh and half a sob, and she turned back to him, and though she did not smile fully there was the ghost of it, the first he had seen since the ballroom, and it went through him like sunrise. "Clear my name," she said. "Yes, not for pride, or not only for pride. For the widow Ferris, who has taken me in and would be shamed by association if the tale stands. And for Tom, who saved is only half saved if his benefactress is a byword. And for every poor gray companion in every great lady's shadow who is taught that if she is noticed, she deserves whatever ruin follows. Let it not stand that a woman can be broken on a lie for the crime of being kind to a stranger. Clear my name, my lord, and clear it before them all, and let Casaubon learn that cruelty is not free." She lifted her chin, and the steel he had loved from the first was back in her, whetted now. "As for the rest, for what you said of loving me, I will not answer it today. I cannot. I am too bruised, and I do not trust my own heart while it is bruised. But I will tell you this much, and you may make of it what you will. The friend I grieved for 10 days is standing at my gate, and he is real after all, and I am glad of it. Whether the friend can become anything more, ask me again when my name is my own once more, and I can hear the question in the clear and answer it free. Will you wait for that?" "I would wait," said Everard, "for the rest of my life." "I hope it will not take so long as that," said Rowena Selwyn. And this time she did smile, wavering and wet and wholly herself. And the Duke of Calderstone rode home from the almshouse cottage with his ruined heart risen up in him like a thing new made, and set himself to the last and greatest labor, to take back before all the assembled world the good name of the woman he loved. In the days between the almshouse garden and the great assembly, Everard did a thing he had not done since before the Black Years. He opened his house. He did it quietly, and he did it for her, though she was not yet in it and might never be. He had the last of the Holland covers drawn off the state rooms. He had the long-shut shutters folded back on their hinges, until the westering light came pouring gold down the length of galleries that had stood in brown dusk for 3 years. He had the chimneys swept and the fires lit and the great hall aired, and the servants, who had crept about the place like mourners since the mistress died, went about it now with a lightness that startled even themselves. For a house knows its master's heart before he speaks it, and Calderstone had felt the change in Everard and was waking with him. He walked the rooms alone of an evening, seeing them new, seeing them as she might see them. Here was the library where she would read. Here the long window-seat that caught the morning where a woman who loved books might sit a whole rainy day. Here the cold state bedchamber that wanted warming, and the little south parlor that would suit her, he thought, being sunny and unpretending, and full of the smell of the roses that grew up the wall outside. He had never in his life furnished a thought of the house around another person's happiness. He had inherited it and dwelt in it and grieved in it, and never once made it welcome. He made it welcome now in his mind room by room, and the making was itself a kind of courtship, a promising of things he had not yet the right to promise, and he knew it was folly to hope so far ahead, and he did it anyway, because hope, once let back into a shuttered heart, is not easily made to keep to modest bounds. Halloran found him one dusk in the long gallery, standing before the portraits of the Calderstones dead and gone, the hard-faced dukes and the pale duchesses in their painted silks. "Airing your ancestors too, my lord," the steward said. "Introducing them," said Everard, "to the notion of a duchess who was a companion in a turned gown, and used to do all the voices reading novels to a dragon in bombazine. I fancy some of them would not care for it." He looked up at a particularly forbidding forbear, his own great-grandfather, who had married a French princess, and looked as though he had never laughed in his life. "But they are all of them dead, Halloran, and they had their choosing, and made it by the rules of estates and blood, and not one of those matches that I ever heard warmed the house the way I mean mine to. Let them frown. I have had 3 years of a cold, correct house. I will have a warm, improper one if she will have me, and count myself the luckiest man ever to hang upon that wall." "If she will have you," Halloran repeated, and there was worry in it still, for the old man had lived long enough to distrust happy endings before they were fastened. "She gave you no promise at the gate, my lord, only a maybe and a hard-earned one. You're building a duchess's parlor round a maybe." "I am," Everard admitted. "It is the most foolish thing I have ever done, and I cannot stop doing it, and I find I do not wish to. 3 years I built nothing but walls, Halloran, and called it prudence. I am done with prudence. If she refuses me, I would rather have hoped like a fool and lost than never have let the light back into these rooms at all. The house has been dark long enough. Whatever she answers, it will not be dark again. That much I have decided, and that much is mine to decide." Halloran was quiet a moment, looking down the bright reawakened gallery, the fires ruddy in the great grates, the shutters folded back on a rose and gold evening sky. "Your father would have liked her," he said at last, gruffly, which from Halloran was as near to blessing as a thing could come. He had no patience with the cold, correct sort neither, whatever the pictures say. He'd have liked a woman with the spine to walk across a whole cruel room toward the man everyone feared, and the heart to warn him of the jest when she got there. Aye, he'd have liked her fine. He cleared his throat, embarrassed. "Well, the rooms are aired and the assemblies in 2 days, and you'd best sleep, my lord, for you've a long county to face down and a name to clear and a heart to lay bare, and a man does none of those well on no rest." Everard did not sleep much that night or the next, but he was not sleepless with grief, as he had been for 3 long years, and that was a change he marked with wonder. He lay awake with hope, which is a wholly different wakefulness, restless and warm and near to unbearable, the wakefulness of a man on the eve of the great hazard of his life, who has done all he can and must now trust the rest to a woman's heart and the world's decency, and whatever mercy governs such things. And when at last he rose on the morning of the assembly, and dressed in the black and silver of a rank he no longer meant to hide, and looked at himself in the long glass, a tall dark man in his late 30s, grief and gladness warring in his face, he thought not of the county he must face, nor of the enemies he must humble, but only of a gray woman in a garden of cabbages who had once told a stranger that she would rather keep faith than be safe, and he squared his shoulders, and went down to keep faith with her in the sight of all the world. The midsummer assembly at the Ashcombe Rooms was the fullest anyone could remember, for word had gone about that the Duke of Calderstone himself, that famous recluse, would attend openly for the first time in living memory, and every family of consequence in 3 counties had crammed itself into the great chandelier-blazing ballroom to see him. It was the same room in which the dare had been spoken. Everard, standing at the head of it in the black and silver of his rank, no longer hiding, no longer Mr. Calder, felt the strange circling of it, that he had come back to the exact floor where his new life had begun in order to fight for it. Cassia Vaughan was there, radiant in silver, sure of her ground, for she believed herself untouchable. She had broken the companion and slighted the Duke and paid no price, and she had come to enjoy the Duke's public humiliation, expecting him to slink and simmer under the county's knowing looks. Lord Purwit was there too, pale and sweating at the edge of her set, and she took his pallor for the usual fear of his creditors and thought nothing of it. Everard let the assembly gather to its height. He had learned patience in 3 hard years, and cruelty had taught Cassia Vaughan nothing of the sort. She could not resist, when the rooms were fullest, coming toward him through the crowd with her practiced sweetness, meaning to make him squirm before the watching county. "My Lord Duke," she said, sinking into a curtsy pitched to be seen, her voice carrying, "how the whole world rejoices to see you among us at last and not in disguise. We had also feared your grace found our simple county dull, though I understand you found some private amusements to lighten the tedium." A titter ran out from her set. "How is your little companion friend? Selwyn, was it? One does hope she has recovered from her disappointment." The room hushed to hear his answer. Everard looked down at Cassia Vaughan from his considerable height, and he did not squirm, and he did not rage, and the very calm of him began, for the first time, to frighten her. "Miss Vaughan," he said, and his voice, pitched low, carried none the less into every corner of the silenced room, for the room strained to catch it. "I am glad you have raised the subject, and glad the whole of the county is present to hear it settled, for it wants settling, and this is the place it was begun and the place it shall be ended." He turned unhurried to take in the whole vast staring assembly. You were most of you in a certain card-room a fortnight since, or you have heard of what passed there. You were told a story, that the Duke of Calderstone had amused his idle hours by courting a poor companion under a false name, meaning to cast her off, and that the woman, one Miss Selwyn, was a fool for believing herself worthy of a great man's regard and got no more than her presumption deserved. That was the story. You fed on it. Some of you are ashamed now. I see it in your faces, and I am glad of the shame, for it is the beginning of honesty. Because the story was a lie, and it was a lie built on purpose by a hand in this room, and I am going to tell you the truth of it, all of it, and hold nothing back, my own faults first. And he did. Before the whole assembled county, the Duke of Calderstone laid himself bare. He told them of the 3 years of grief, the shuttered house, the wife and child in the ground, the ghost he had become. He told them without self-pity that he had come among them under a plain name, not to deceive any woman, but because he could not bear one more face that saw his rank before it saw his person. He told them that a lady's companion dared at this very assembly to dance with the man no one would approach, had crossed the floor and warned him of the cruel jest rather than let it fall on a stranger, and that in her honesty he had found the first friend of his desolate life, and had, coward that he was, hidden his name from her too long, and that the whole fault of what followed was his own. He hid nothing that told against himself, and the room, which had come to see a great man squirm, sat in a silence that had turned from avid to ashamed, because there is nothing so disarming as a proud man telling the whole truth against himself in a loud, clear voice. "That is my part," Everard said, "and I have not spared it. Now hear the other part which I did not build and which was built against an innocent woman a purpose." He raised his voice but a little. "Lord Pruitt." Every head turned. Cassia Vaughan's silver-gloved hand tightened on her fan, and the first true fear came into her face. Lord Pruitt came forward. He was shaking and white, and for once in his wasted life he did a thing that was hard instead of a thing that was easy, and he did it because a stronger and better man than Cassia Vaughan had, for once, gotten hold of him. He confessed. He told the silenced room that the whole tale of the Duke's cruel amusement had been a fabrication, coached to him word for word, that he had whispered it deliberately, at a chosen hour in a chosen crowded room, to break a woman who had done no wrong, and that he had done it because he was in the power of another, who held a thing over his life and had used it to make him a tool. And when the room, breathless, demanded who, Lord Pruitt turned shaking, but he turned and named Cassia Vaughan. The room came apart in a roar. Cassia Vaughan stood in the center of it in her silver gown, and for the first time in her reign she felt the thing she had spent her life inflicting, the turning of a crowd, the cold delight of a society finding a new victim and the victim herself. She tried to laugh it off. She tried scorn. She tried, at the last, tears. None of it held, for Pruitt had the particulars, and the particulars were damning, and the county that had feasted on Rowena Selwyn's ruin discovered all at once a keener appetite for Cassia Vaughan's. Everard let it run just far enough to be irreversible. Her reign was finished. She would leave the county within the month and not return, married off in the end to a distant merged fortune in a far shire where her story had not traveled, which was ruin enough for a woman who had lived for her consequence. And then, because he was not a cruel man and had learned the cost of cruelty, he raised his hand and stopped the pack before it tore her, for he had come to clear a name, not to make a spectacle of destruction, and Rowena would not have wished the second even upon her enemy. "Enough," he said, and the room fell quiet at the word, because it was the word of a man they had learned in the last quarter hour to respect. "I did not tell you this to give you a new cruelty to feed on. You have all fed enough this season, and so, God forgive me, have I told you so that one thing should be beyond any man's power to deny hereafter, that Rowena Selwyn is innocent of everything laid to her charge, that she was kind where kindness cost her, and honest where honesty was dangerous, and that she was broken on a manufactured lie by people not fit to fasten her shoe. That is the truth, and you have heard it, all of you, and you will carry it home, and there is an end of the other story forever." and then the great doors at the foot of the room opened, for Everard had arranged it so, and Rowena Selwyn came in. She was not in grey. Halloran, with the quiet complicity of cook and the widow Ferris and a discreet Netherstowe dressmaker whose bill went to Calderstone and whose discretion was absolute, had seen to a gown not grand. For Rowena would not have grand, and Everard had learned to honor her will, but a soft dove blue that became her, simple and fine, with a little lace at the throat that had been the widow Ferris's own, given from love. Her hair was dressed with a few of the late roses from the almshouse garden. She came up the long floor alone, straight-backed, her chin level, through the same lane of staring faces she had twice crossed before. But this time the faces did not sneer, for they had just been shamed out of sneering, and this time she did not walk toward cruelty nor away from love, but toward a man who stood waiting for her at the head of the room in the sight of all the world, having just laid his whole heart and history bare for her sake. Everard came down to meet her. He did not wait at the top like a lord receiving a suppliant. He came down the floor to her, which the whole room marked, and he stopped before her and bowed, deeply. The bow a man gives an equal or his better, and not the nod a duke gives a companion. "Miss Selwyn," he said, and his voice was not quite steady, and he did not care who heard it shake. "Your name is your own again before them all and clean forever. I have kept that promise. There remains one thing I asked leave to ask you again when the air was clear. The air is clear now, and the whole world is my witness, which is only just, for the whole world witnessed the wrong." He drew a breath. "I love you. I have hidden nothing tonight, and I will hide nothing ever again. I'm a widower and was a broken man, and you unbroke me without knowing you did it. I have rank which you never wanted, and a great cold house that has waited 3 years for someone to make it warm, and a heart that has only one use left in it, which is to love you as long as it beats. I am asking you freely before them all, with nothing hidden and nothing held over you. Will you marry me? Not the companion and the duke. Only Rowena, and only Everard, who loves her." The room did not breathe. Rowena Selwyn looked up at him, and her eyes were full, and the whole long trial of her life seemed to gather in her a moment, the orphaning, the grudging relations, the gray years of being overlooked and spoken over, and made to feel that she was worth nothing, and would be loved by no one, and Everard watched her set it all down, at last, and choose. "When you first asked me to dance," she said, and though her voice trembled it carried, for she meant it to be heard, "I was frightened of the whole room, and I walked toward the one man in it everyone feared, because I would rather keep faith than be safe. I have not changed, my lord. I would still rather keep faith than be safe. And I have thought these 10 days and these last minutes, and I find I do not want to keep my heart safe from you any longer." She drew a breath. "Yes, I will marry you. Not for your house and not for your rank, and not because a whole ballroom is watching, but because you came to my gate with your hat in your hands and gave me back my own choice, and no one in all my life had ever done that before, and I loved you for it, and I love you still. Yes, Everard, yes." He took her hand, her bare hand, for she had drawn off her glove, as she had in the churchyard, and he raised it to his lips, and the great room broke at last, not into a roar of cruelty, but into something it had not made in a long while, a warm, astonished swell of true feeling. For even the coldest heart there had been moved despite itself by the sight of an overlooked woman lifted at last into the light and cherished, and a proud, grieving man brought back to life by loving her. They were married before the summer was out, quietly, at the little church by whose churchyard gate he had once held her hand in the rain. The widow Ferris wept in the front pew in her one good gown. Tom Ferris, walking sound and proud on his crooked leg, held the horses. Halloran gave the bride away, gruff and glistening, and told Everard afterward, privately, that he had waited 30 years to see the boy he had held in the cradle look like that, and that it had been worth the waiting. Calderstone Hall unshuttered every window. The great cold house that had kept a ghost's hours for 3 years filled with light and voices, and the ordinary business of a life. Rowena set the library free of its Holland covers with her own hands, and read there of an evening, aloud, doing all the voices, for the pure joy of a woman who had loved books and been permitted few, and now had 1,000 and a husband who listened. The detestable spaniel, it must be recorded, went to a comfortable retirement in the almshouse, and was much happier there, and so was everyone. And Rowena Selwyn, who had owned nothing in the world but her character and her good humor, became the Duchess of Calderstone, and used her consequence, as she had once told a stranger in a garden she would, not to rise above the gray women in the shadows of great ladies, but to remember them, and lift them, and see that justice reached the people the polished world overlooked. In the years that came, Everard would sometimes wake in the dark, as men who have known grief will, and feel the old cold reach for him, and he would turn and find her there, warm and breathing and real, the woman who had crossed a whole cruel ballroom toward the one man no one dared approach, and never knowing his name or his rank, chosen kindness over safety and given him back his life. And the cold would let him go. He had come to that country a hollowed man, meaning to sell his house and vanish from the world. He stayed a whole one, cherished and cherishing, in a house full of light, beside the poor overlooked companion who had turned out to be the whole of his fortune, and of everything the great Duke of Calderstone possessed in this life: his lands, his title, his 40,000 a year he counted, to the end of his long and happy days, that one dance the richest thing he had ever been given.